OneAcademy is the heart of our company. Cryptocurrency is not an easy product. It's a very innovative product based on technology and based on very, very complex concepts. For us to be part of this financial revolution, to be part of cryptocurrency and of a community, we need to understand exactly what we do and what we talk about. And this is why we have the OneAcademy. The OneAcademy provides you with concepts, provides you with explanation on cryptocurrency and on the financial world. I would encourage everybody to join the courses, to do the certificates, and to understand thoroughly how to use cryptocurrency, what cryptocurrency is, and how we can change the world by using cryptocurrency. OneAcademy. Learn today, lead tomorrow.
Good afternoon, good evening, good day, wherever you are from the Caribbean and the rest of the world. And we would like to welcome you to our OneAcademy Zoom call 2020 Lunch and Learn edition. We certainly appreciate you being on the call with us. My name is GMT20200427, and I am an independent marketing associate out of Trinidad and Tobago. Our founder, Dr. Ruja Ignatova, has said that we learn today and lead tomorrow. What is OneAcademy? OneAcademy is an innovative e-learning platform covering a broad range of topics, including financial areas such as financial analysis, asset management, forex, the stock market, cryptocurrency, and more. Our mission is to provide our students with the guidance and educational material needed to achieve financial literacy. OneAcademy is developed by finance experts and academics. It's highly structured and easy to understand. You learn at your own pace and can be a part of the global finance reset. Our intention is to give you a unique sense of understanding and facts that you can use to enhance your knowledge and daily lives, as well as promote our core product, OneAcademy, and the benefits of our ecosystem. So I do encourage you to take copious notes as to assist you in your quest to become certified, knowledgeable, and wise business leaders and money managers. Our presenter today is none other than my friend and brother, Mr. Alvin Morton. Mr. Morton is a business graduate. Of course, he's involved in the Toastmasters Association and a very knowledgeable individual. So it is this, at this point in time, I would like to take the opportunity to invite today's presenter, Mr. Alvin Morton, onto the call. Alvin, take it away.
A pleasant good afternoon, a pleasant morning, pleasant evening, pleasant day to each and every one of us on this call and joining us from the various countries in the world where there is a footprint associated with One Life and the One Life network. Thank you very much, Dwayne KDs, for that kind introduction. And today we're going to cover, or at least attempt so to do in this lunch and learn session, the topic called inflation. So in the words of Chris Cuomo from Cuomo Primetime, let's get after it. And while we're doing that, I'm going to just share my screen and proceed to get this day's presentation underway. So we have two eminent gentlemen who have given perspectives on inflation. Milton Friedman from the School of the Monetary or the Liberalist, be it classical or embedded classical or neoliberalism, which is the new form. And his view is that inflation is taxation without legislation. John Maynard Keynes from whom is born the Keynesian view of economics. His view is that by a continuing process of inflation, government can confiscate secretly and unobserved an important part of the wealth of their citizens. One thing that we should note, while both of these gentlemen are on opposite sides of the spectrum, Keynes being on the demand side of the thing and believing that government should influence aggregate demand wherever it can, especially in times of a recession. So some may say we will see a lot of Keynesian type economics at play, given the COVID-19 scenario. Milton Friedman, Friedrich von Hayek, and a number of other members of this school of thought will tell you that inflation is a monetary phenomenon, and it is always influenced by the supply side and having too much money chasing too few goods. We're going to get into a bit of that as we proceed. We should remember, though, that we provide information that should not be construed or is not designed to be a source of financial information. One Life is not an investment company. However, this information that we share through the OneAcademy, we believe, will provide you with an important perspective as part of your due diligence. Some definitions of inflation as gathered or determined by Investopedia.com. And this is another resource that I use as part of my process in my own due diligence and to be able to add value to this august network. Inflation is the rate at which the general level of prices for goods and services is rising. And consequently, the purchasing power of currency is falling. Inflation, it is the rise in the general level of prices where a unit of currency effectively buys less than it did in prior periods. Inflation is classified into three types. We have demand pull inflation, we have cost push inflation, and built-in inflation. Those with tangible assets like property or stocked commodities may like to see some inflation, as that raises the value of their assets. I found this particular statement to be interesting because it might help to explain why one of the first places when stimuli are developed and approved, the first place that it seems to go is in paper assets. But we will get into that at some point and in some level as we progress through today's presentation. Some types of inflation, again, going into a bit more detail before we actually see a video, which I think more eloquently and perhaps more simply articulates what this thing called inflation is. Cost push inflation, decrease in the aggregate supply of goods and services stemming from an increase in the cost of production. Demand pull inflation, increase in the aggregate demand categorized by the four sections of the economy, macroeconomy: households, business, governments, and foreign buyers. An increase in the costs of raw material inputs or labor can contribute to cost pull inflation. Demand pull inflation can be caused by an expanding economy, increased government spending, or overseas growth. Built-in inflation is that kind of inflation which evolves from past events and continues to affect the current economic or economical conditions of a nation. And this is from economywatch.com. I'm going to take us through a video now, which I think more eloquently articulates what this thing called inflation is. So let's listen.
We've got one more key concept to share before we go deeper into current economic conditions, and that's inflation. Most of us think of inflation as rising prices, as though it were things becoming more expensive, but that's not quite right. It's actually your money losing value. Imagine if one year an apple and an orange are $1 each, but next year they're $10 each. Since you enjoy eating apples and oranges the same amount in one year as the next, then they will be exactly the same next year as this year. But next year they will cost 10 times as much, which means that the only thing that's truly changed in this example is your money, which has declined in value. Inflation is not caused by rising prices. Rising prices are a symptom of inflation. Inflation is caused by the presence of too much money in relation to the things we want to buy. But what we experience on a daily basis is things going up in price, but in fact inflation is really the value of your money going down simply because there's too much of it around. Now, here's an example. Suppose you're on a life raft and somebody on board has an orange and they're willing to sell it for money. Only one person in the raft has any money at all, and that's a single dollar, so the orange is going to sell for $1. But wait, just before it sells, you find a $10 bill in your pocket. Now how much do you suppose the orange is going to sell for? That's right, $10. The orange just shot up in price tenfold. But it's still the same orange, right? Nothing about the utility or desirability of the orange has changed from one minute to the next, only the amount of money kicking around in the boat. Which puts us firmly in the camp of Milton Friedman, who claimed that inflation is everywhere and always a monetary phenomenon. Again, inflation is not rising prices. Those are symptoms. The cause of rising prices everywhere and always is an excess of money relative to the things people want to buy. And what's true within our tiny life raft example is equally true across an entire nation. Here, let me illustrate this point using a long sweep of U.S. history. What we're looking at here is a graph of price levels in the United States that begins on the left in 1665 and progresses more than 300 years to 2013 on the right. But at this moment, only inflation over the period from 1665 to 1776 is marked on the chart. On the y-axis, what is being charted are price levels, not the rate of inflation. In 1665, the basic cost of living was set to a value of 5. What is most striking about this chart to me is that from 1665 to 1776, there was absolutely no inflation. Zero. None. That is over a 111-year period. If you saved $1, you had $1. To contrast this to today, if 111 years ago you saved $1, today you'd have about 2 cents. Okay, back to the chart. Along came a war, the Revolutionary War, and the country found itself unable to pay for the war, with gold and silver to be found in the treasury. So, a paper currency called the Continental was printed, and at first it was fully backed by a specified amount of real gold and or silver in the treasury. But then the war proved to be more expensive than thought, and more Continentals were printed. Then the British, acutely aware of the corrosive effects of inflation on a society, started counterfeiting and distributing vast amounts of bogus Continentals, and soon the currency began to collapse. Seen on the inflation chart, the Revolutionary War took the general price level from a reading of 5 to a reading of 8, which is a pretty serious increase of some 60% in a very short amount of time. After the war, the paper Continentals were utterly rejected by the populace, who strongly preferred gold and silver. And most interestingly, with the return to using gold and silver as money, price levels promptly returned back to their pre-war levels. The next serious bout of inflation was also associated with the war, again due to overprinting of a paper currency. And again, upon conclusion of the war, we saw a relatively prompt return of prices back to their pre-war levels, where they stayed for an additional 30 years. By now, we're nearly 200 years into this chart, and we find that the cost of living is roughly the same as it was in 1665. And just try to imagine a world where you will know the price of things hundreds of years into the future, because they'll be the same as today. At any rate, prices remained stable until, you guessed it, another war came along, the Civil War, which was highly inflationary. Eventually, before too long, prices again returned to their baseline levels. And then another war came along, this one even bigger than any before, and again, it was a highly inflationary event. And then another war came along, even bigger than any before it, which again proved inflationary, but this time, something odd happened. Inflation did not retreat before the next war began. Why? 2 reasons. First, America was no longer on a gold standard, but instead a fiat paper standard administered by the Federal Reserve, and the populace did not have another form of money to which it could turn in preference. And second, instead of dismantling the war apparatus upon conclusion of hostilities, the Pentagon was built, full mobilization was maintained, and a protracted Cold War was fought, certainly as inflationary a conflict as any shooting war ever was. And now if we look at the entire sweep of history, we can make an utterly obvious claim. All wars are inflationary. Period. No exceptions. The reason is simply because the government spends more money than it has, so we can amend this statement to say that government deficit spending is inflationary. We discussed the reason why back in the chapter on money and wealth, where we noted that prices can only remain stable if there is a stable relationship between the amount of circulating currency and the things we need and want to buy. When the government borrows money, that is, printed out of thin air by a compliant central bank, the new money definitely has real purchasing power. But where did that purchasing power come from? By definition, it's not possible to print up real things, only temporary purchasing power, so any and all acts of printing simply removes a tiny fraction of the value of all the other outstanding money and gives that value to the new money. At any rate, back to our main story, here's inflation between 1665 and 1975. Knowing what you now know about Nixon's actions on August 15, 1971, where any physical restraint on human desires was removed from the money system, what do you suppose the rest of the graph looks like between 1975 and today? This is your world. You've been living on the steeply rising portion of this graph for so long that you probably view it as level ground. That is, you expect inflation and plan for it as if it were an unavoidable feature of life, like gravity. But I hope we've shown you that sustained inflation wasn't always a permanent condition of life, but rather it's a recent development. And the cause of that persistent inflation is simply that money and debt have been growing faster than the economy on a percentage basis for decades. Which means your money has been declining in value exponentially. That's what this hockey stick graph is telling you. And what does it mean to live in a world where your money loses value exponentially? Well, you know what it means because you live there. It means increasingly having to work harder and harder just to stay in place. And it means increasingly perplexing and astoundingly risky investment decisions have to be made in an attempt to grow one's savings fast enough to outpace the creation of money and debt. It means two incomes are needed where one used to suffice, leaving less time for family and community strengthening while both parents work. A world of constantly eroding money is a devilishly complicated world to navigate and, for most, leaves scant room for error. But wait a minute, you're thinking. Inflation has not yet really gotten out of control, and yet the Fed has been printing like crazy for a while. How can that be? Actually, we are experiencing a huge amount of inflation. But we have to remember that inflation applies to anything that people might want to buy. Sometimes inflation means the basic necessities of life, like bread and gasoline, become more expensive. And sometimes inflation means that our houses become more expensive to purchase. And sometimes, as is true today, it means things like stocks and bonds shoot up in price. Quite unfairly, when governments print like crazy, those closest to the printing benefit the most because they have access to all that newly created money first. The name for this is seigniorage, and it has been known about for a really long time. It's actually a very well understood process. In today's world, those closest to the money printing are already fabulously wealthy. You've heard about the 1%, or perhaps the 0.1%, I should say. And after a point, additional money in their hands does not stimulate as much in the way of additional purchasing of things like bread and gasoline, because there's only so much one can consume. The wealth disparity in the United States is now as large as it has ever been. And that is largely just a known side effect of central bank printing. But the money these ultra-wealthy families and financial institutions have piles up faster and faster, and it has to go somewhere. And so it does. First into anything that can contain that much money, so it goes into the largest and most liquid markets like the U.S. Treasury bond market and the stock market. That's stage one, and it's already happened. Then it goes into things rich people can most easily appreciate, such as fine wine and high-end art and trophy properties. That's stage two, and that's already happened as well. Eventually, as paper investments begin to look shaky due to growing concerns that maybe there's just too many claims on real wealth, these concentrated holders of wealth begin to shift out of paper and back into real things. Slowly at first, but then suddenly towards the end. Real things like land and metals and housing and basic commodities begin to rise in price as we shift to stage 3 of the inflationary process. Looking at the exponential trajectory of our money supply since America went off the gold standard in 1971, and the increasingly extreme recent measures discussed in the chapter on quantitative easing, we are dangerously close to entering stage 3, if not already in its early days. John Maynard Keynes, the father of the branch of economics that utterly dominates our lives, had this to say about inflation. Lenin was certainly right. There is no more positive or subtle or surer means of destroying the existing basis of society than to debauch the currency. By a continuing process of inflation, governments can confiscate, secretly and unobserved, an important part of the wealth of the citizens. The process engages all of the hidden forces of economics on the side of destruction and does it in a manner that not one man in a million can diagnose. Now, finally, in this chapter of the crash course, we can string together these three very important dots. Dot number one. In 1971, the United States, and by extension the world, terminated the last connection to a gold restraint, and federal borrowing turned the corner, never to look back. Dot number two. At this same time, the money supply and debt levels turned the corner, starting to pile up at rates much faster than the economy was growing. And dot number three. Inflation is the fully predictable outcome of dots number 1 and 2. Boom, boom, boom. 1, 2, 3. All connected, all saying the same thing, with profound implications for our future. Now, if you're of a mind that there's no reason that all three of these graphs cannot just continue to exponentially accelerate to ever higher amounts without end, then there's no point in watching the rest of the crash course. However, if you don't believe that, then you're going to want to see the rest of this video series. Alright, the point of this section was to help you appreciate first the fact that our country has not always lived under a regime of perpetual inflation, and second, that historically speaking, persistent inflation is actually a rather recent development. And now we have our next key concept. Inflation is everywhere and always a monetary phenomenon. Flipped a bit, we can say that inflation is a deliberate act of policy. We might also observe that this policy benefits a very small group of individuals and institutions at the expense of literally everybody else. Most unfairly, it robs from our future selves to satisfy our current cravings. Okay, now that we've covered compounding, money, and inflation, you're nearly fully equipped with the tools to get the most from the remaining sections of the crash course. But there's one more tool to put in our kit: a better appreciation for really big numbers. Please join me for the next chapter, How Much is a Trillion? Thank you for listening.
I trust that this video was particularly helpful to someone on this call, if only one person, because we can now understand, hopefully, why some aspects of advice we've been given continue to persist, such as saving money, or this notion that once you've retired, you can somehow continue to subsist and survive on less than 100% of your pre-retirement income. That would have been possible after listening to this video and considering other components. That would have been possible if in saving $1, you continued to have $1. The problem is, because we are no longer on a standard that imposes monetary supply restraint, those notions also have become irrelevant, if not obsolete. But our OneAcademy also has something to say about inflation. Page 20. Inflation is usually a product of the actions of the central banks, which will be covered in more detail, and the overall performance of the economy of a given country. Inflation can hurt your investments if you invest on the forex market, and a sudden event drives the price of money wild. Inflation can hardly be beneficial for your monetary savings over time, as mentioned earlier. The price of the US dollar has dropped to a tiny fraction of its value in 1913. And on page 33, as a result, when the monetary base, which means all money within the economy, is expanding, i.e. inflation is being created, the prices of commodities in terms of money tend to rise, since the price of one monetary unit has fallen in terms of a given commodity. And I believe it was at the One Life presentation that I did on Saturday evening, where a video was played that suggested the reason behind traders being interested in downward trends or recessions, because they can actually profit from it using hedging strategies. And some of those strategies incorporate the use of commodities. Page 40, what is more, inflation has noticeably decreased the price of the dollar between 1971 and 2011. This, of course, was articulated also by Chris Martinson in the video just now. Page 48, with the injection of more money into the economy, which by itself is the definition of inflation, they decrease the purchasing power of the monetary unit. So some takeaways. Inflation. It is an indication that money, or perhaps more accurately, currency has lost value. It is too much currency available compared to the items we want or need. It is the result of increasing government borrowing after the gold standard ended in 1971 by then US President Richard Nixon. And we should recall the period 1665 to 1776, and then 1776 until 1913, when the Federal Reserve was created. And we need to remember that the Federal Reserve is a private institution. When one saved a dollar, one had a dollar. Inflation is a deliberate act of policy, benefits a few and steals from the future. Inflation is everywhere and always a monetary phenomenon. Milton Friedman said so. All wars are inflationary. And I could not help perhaps being a bit provocative or cheeky here. Ask the question whether what we're seeing in oil is perhaps another type of war. This was an interesting concept, seigniorage. The difference between the face value of money, that is a $10 bill, and the cost to produce it. This is according to Investopedia.com. And of course, those closest to the printing of it benefit most. And then there were 3 stages that were identified. We were for concentrated holders of money. The first stage would be the US Treasury bonds. The second stage is fine wine, high-end art, trophy property, and so on. The third stage would be land, metals, basic commodities. And I thought that it would have been useful to articulate or to introduce this concept called the Cantillon Effect. Richard Cantillon, an economist of the 18th century, talks about this effect. And it says basically in these points, an increase in the money supply, it begins with an increase in the money supply, and who first receives that increase. The increase of money changes income distribution in favor of those who receive the new money. Depending on the preferences, some goods will experience an increase in demand, others will see a relative decrease. This will obviously change outputs of various goods and ultimately investments. If the new money comes into the hands of savers, the interest rate would decrease. If it comes into the hands of consumers, the interest rate would increase, as entrepreneurs would need to borrow more to meet the increased demand for goods. Again, this last statement helped me understand why, for whatever reason, when money is created by the Fed, the first place it seems to go is into stocks, bonds, paper instruments, treasury bonds, and the like. And while we may disagree with some of these things, for obvious reasons, it certainly provides understanding. And that is the key thing about OneAcademy that we seek to sell, in inverted commas. Chris Martinson mentioned this business of an appreciation of really big numbers. So let's start or end, as I would say, this section with such an appreciation. $1 million is 4 inches high of $1,000 bills. 1 billion is 358 feet high. This is taller than the Statue of Liberty. And 1 trillion is 67.9 miles or 100 kilometers high. And if we want to understand how high that is somewhere in the mesosphere, from the Earth's surface up to the mesosphere in bills. So when we talk about $6 trillion, can you imagine what we are in fact talking about? As I close today's session, I'd like to encourage each of us to do a few things. One, to Google the terms. Feel free not to take my word for it. Check for yourself. Look for this thing called seigniorage. look at this thing called the Cantillon Effect and understand why some persons position themselves in certain places and why banks inevitably must get bail-ins or bailouts or both. Get to information sessions and or into your OneAcademy Level 1. It provides an excellent place to expand your own knowledge and understanding. If the rate of change on the outside exceeds the rate of change on the inside, the end is near. And this was from Jack Welch, the former chairman and CEO of General Electric. Have a super fabulous day, everyone, and continue to stay safe. And allow me, please, to turn this back over to our duty, the way it is.
Thank you, Alvin. Wow, wow, wow. Information galore this morning. And chat box. I saw a lot of people getting involved. Kojo, Kesby, Noel, Jack, myself. Definitely thought-provoking information. And I hope that it provokes us more to act than just to think. As I said before, what we should do is test everything. Go do our own research on the terms that you have brought for us today and help educate ourselves, because if there was a way into this debt trap, then most definitely there should be a way out of it. So again, thank you, Alvin, very much for your presentation. And do look forward to taking in this recording, I'm sure, so that we can further educate and help to position ourselves. It's at this point in time that we would like to go across to our deal shaker segment. So today, I would like to introduce our deal shaker merchant. His name is Mr. Samuel George. I'm hoping that I could have some assistance to have his mic unmuted at this point in time. And Mr. George, if you would, introduce yourself and introduce your deal shaker store to us.
Good day to my One Life family. Are you all hearing me clearly?
Good day, sir. Go right ahead.
Right.
We're hearing you loud and
I got involved in this business about a year and a half ago. But before I speak about myself, I want to really and fully congratulate our presenter. This young man seemed to be very knowledgeable. And while knowledge is power, it is most powerful when it is practiced. So Alvin, hats off to you. We had done a deal during the course of December, it was, a boat cruise. So I don't know if I can be given some help to place that deal back up on the screen. Right, that's it. The boat ride. What will happen with this? What we're doing here is showing people proof of usability. We had placed on this particular event 100 coupons at 1 coin for a coupon. And as the deal became available, within the first 4 hours, the 100 coupons were used up. Ladies and gentlemen, this thing really works. And people could tell you whatever, they could say whatever they want to say. When you have proof of something working, nobody can change your mind on that. We have been doing a lot of different deals. And my company has been handling a lot of different things because I'm very versatile. Also too, what I would like to show you all, a very, very short video. It might be about less than a minute. Because of the fact that what we did, we used this particular platform. And there you'll see a light aircraft coming into land. This was also on our Deal Shaker platform by another merchant. And I was fortunate enough to buy 10 hours of flight. You can just imagine getting involved in something where you can afford to buy 10 hours or more flying time of a light aircraft. And that's me there. Ladies and gentlemen, this thing really and truly, it really works. We will show you all during the course of the week some other projects. Here we have two of my vehicles because I am a general contractor. And over time, you have to keep changing vehicles. Our vehicles are driven by directors only. So people looking to buy a vehicle from us will know that the vehicles that we are putting on the Deal Shaker platform are what you call owner driven. This particular vehicle, the black one you're seeing there, that is a TCP in excellent working condition. Everything in it works except the driver. So ladies and gentlemen, we have placed this black vehicle, and there's another one, the brown one also. That one is also placed on the Deal Shaker because we have just shown you riding in boat, we shown you riding in plane, and now we are showing you riding in vehicles. This is a moving vehicle, moving business. Ladies and gentlemen, I give thanks for Muriel Lizama, who got me involved in this business. And to date, it is only success after success after success. I thank you.
Thank you, Mr. George, for articulating your position and really showing us what reusability is all about. I know from my interactions with you that this is just the tip of the iceberg, and you will continue to show our community what usability and professionalism is all about. So thank you very much for your offerings this morning. And to our global community, we need to understand that this is what it's all about. We are not only creating value for ourselves, but Mr. George, through his activities, is creating value for us all. Because when movement takes place in terms of the Deal Shaker platform, when purchases take place, what happens is that the value of our coin through productivity, the value of our coin goes up. And we all need to contribute in our significant ways, right? In terms of the participating on the Deal Shaker platform. As one of our IMAs so eloquently put it, you have to be involved in a business that is within a business, and that is what we have on the Deal Shaker platform, according to my colleague SP, the donut effect, where we have productivity happening within our network. And that is what drives the value of our coin. So as King James says, we're not based on speculation, but we are based on regulation. So again, I want to thank Mr. Samuel George. I want to reach out and say thank you again to our presenter, Mr. Alvin Morton, who gave us so much to think about this morning as we lunch and learn. And from the Caribbean and the rest of the world, I want to bid you a pleasant evening, good afternoon, or good night, wherever you are. And as we say, from One Life Caribbean Land, one's out.